Well, thank you for the applause. I haven't done anything yet. Good afternoon. I'm Christian Fischer, President and CEO of Georgia Pacific, and I want to welcome everyone, all the employees, KII, Georgia Pacific, whether you're here with us in the auditorium or streaming virtually, welcome. And welcome to our guests as well, who actually will provide the real content here of the discussion today. They gave me about 10 minutes worth of material here, but they only gave me 3 minutes and then asked me to get out of the way. So I will be brief. Some of those at Georgia Pacific know about this, others might not. We're today continuing a series of conversations that we started earlier this year, sort of an experiment to bring some conversations on big societal issues that are on our employees' minds into the firm, having some discussion on them. And you know, because they're on your minds anyway, we think they're critical to talk about, to think about, and start conversations, but also that we learn more about the subjects that we talk about. We learn more about what the company is doing and how it's engaging, but we hope to also inspire and show you some opportunities on how you personally may want to engage in any of these topics. So a couple of the topics we covered this year. In March, during Women's History Month, we had a panel of experts here who talked about challenges that women find in the workplace. In April, we had a pretty good, engaging conversation about race, diversity, inclusion here. We'll have some other conversations later in the year about the opioid crisis that we're facing in this country, about human trafficking. But today, we're here to talk about criminal justice reform. And the question is, why are we as a company actually even engaging in that topic? And I'd take you back to Charles Koch's vision that our communities are safest when the criminal justice system respects human dignity. But when you look at the situation in this country today, where you have 2.2 million people incarcerated, that's 700 for every 100,000 residents. And I think it's a staggering number. Somewhere between 70 to 100 million Americans have a criminal record. And what kind of role and impact it has on opportunities, including employment, it's just mind-boggling. But it goes further than that, because children who have a parent behind bars are also more likely to end up behind bars. So what we're having today is not only affecting today's generation, but also tomorrow's, and that's a very steep price to pay. Koch Industries continues to advocate for reforms in the criminal justice system because, as an organization, we're actually trying to unite people and remove barriers to opportunity, particularly for the least advantaged. So when you think about what else Koch supports and how, we support more than 70 organizations across the country that help transform lives, especially in fragile communities. And we're trying to tackle issues like criminal justice, educational reform, homelessness, addiction, and removing barriers for women, but also minority entrepreneurs. So if you want to learn more, there's plenty of information also on the Koch website. But now I want to introduce the key guest, if you will, the moderator and keynote speaker, Mark Holden, a colleague of ours, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary of Koch Industries, and he'll be leading today's conversation. And you'll hear about different criminal justice reform from different criminal justice reform leaders and organizations who are joining us on this journey to actually tackling this issue. Mark's business cards, I think, reads General Counsel, but I might as well read like Bridge Builder, because I think that's exactly what he's trying to do. Across the political spectrum, whether they're from past administration or current administration, across both aisles, and also reaching deep into grassroots organization and community organizers to essentially assemble a coalition to reform what we think is a broken and very ineffective criminal justice system. Mark's got a personal experience and passion about this. He grew up in, how do you pronounce this, Worcester?
Worcester.
Worcester, kind of close, right? Massachusetts, a working class hometown, and that's where he experienced first, issues related to the topic today. He's been immersed with prison issues and criminal justice reform his whole life, once working as a janitor alongside people on a work release crew, but also when at the University of Massachusetts, he worked on prison during his breaks, and he saw people that actually had committed very bad things, But he also saw very poor, uneducated people that basically had no chance or little opportunity to break out of that life cycle of theirs. So he believes, as I do, that the system makes it extremely difficult for a poor person to defend themselves against charges and accusations, and that's plain wrong. So, but Mark will tell you more about this, and Mark, thank you for being here, and more than that, for what you're doing. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I appreciate it, man. All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. Bridge builder, Ty Darland, never saw that one coming, huh? Ooh, me neither. So it's great to be here. Hey, I want to just start out, excuse me, Christian mentioned the coalitions we've worked with. I want to just show you a slide that demonstrates that. And this is consistent with Charles's vision, obviously, and Charles's hero, Frederick Douglass, would unite with anyone to do right and with no one to do wrong. And you'll see that we've worked with every single group under the sun. Center, left, right, doesn't matter. We'll partner with you. And that means that we've worked with Valerie Jarrett very productively, Jared Kushner, still working with them very productively, Cory Booker, Mike Lee, Governor Bevin, Governor Malloy, Governor Deal. It doesn't matter to us. We just want to get this done. We want to try to get criminal justice reform made because it's a really big deal. And why are we involved? Christian hit that already. We're about removing barriers to opportunity, period, right? And if you look at our criminal justice system, it creates some of the greatest barriers to opportunity that exist in our society today. And there are other barriers, but we're going to talk about this one today, as Christian mentioned. So first, what's our vision? What do we think a criminal justice system should do and look like? And why are we involved? So first, we're involved because it's the right thing to do morally. Bryan Stevenson, I think you all may be familiar with him, he puts a lot of things really well. He nailed this one. We have a two-tiered justice system. And if you're poor, you experience a much different system than everybody else. He says the rich and guilty are treated better than the poor and innocent. So there's the immorality of it, the whole system. It's not equal justice. We also look at it from the constitutional perspective. You know, the Founding Fathers got a lot of things wrong, but they nailed a lot of things too. And in the Bill of Rights, our inalienable rights, our God-given rights, 40% of the Bill of Rights deal with criminal justice issues, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. So that was a warning that the greatest threat to our liberty and freedom would come through the government, through the criminal justice system. And in many ways, we haven't listened to that because it's still happening today. And lastly, we look at it from a fiscal perspective. And as I like to say, the fiscal case becomes the moral case. Because particularly in the states, as you all know, you live in one of the states, you're lucky to have a governor like Governor Deal and legislators who care about this issue. Conservatives have kind of driven this issue, and I don't care who drives it as long as it's good. Left, right, center, doesn't matter to us. But they come in, I like to say is conservatives will come in, conservative governors, now liberal governors as well. They come in for the savings, but they stay for the salvation, because that's what it's all about. And what you learn is if you're not locking up people for long periods of time who don't need to be locked up that long or don't need to even be in prison at all, but can be diverted safely or trained while they're in prison so when they come out, they're less troubled, more skilled, and more productive, then you realize you don't have to have people in prison that long at all, and you can start closing prisons. And then you can fund things like educations and roads and mental health treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So we think the fiscal case is the moral case. And our interest in this was piqued really, a case we had in Corpus Christi, Texas many years ago. I won't go into the details. It was a gross miscarriage of justice, over-criminalization. There was doctored evidence in the grand jury. It wasn't by us, probably wasn't by the grand jurors, so I'm going to go with the prosecutors probably did that. But in any event, we resolved that case. And when we resolved it, Charles asked us, did the system work the way we thought it should work and could work and is supposed to work? And we said no. And he said, well, let's try to change this. Let's make this system what it should be. And so we started doing it about 12 years ago, and we're still working. We got a long way to go, but we've made a lot of progress. My personal story, Kristen kind of butchered the name. It's Worcester, like it's spelled. When I worked in the prison, it's okay. Nobody gets it right. When I worked in the prison growing up, there were a number of kids who I grew up with who were incarcerated. And they were big-time knuckleheads, as was I. The only difference was I had parents who held me so accountable, I was more afraid of them than anything else. And they wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do and made me do all the things I didn't want to do. And had they not done that, I easily could have been behind bars as well. I know that. So it was one of those there for the grace of God go I moments. And I saw from an early age, my family, we didn't have any resources. If you get caught up in the system and you don't have resources, you're done for life. And I knew that at the age of 18. And luckily, I didn't see it personally, but it has happened to a lot of people I know, and probably a lot of people you know. So what are our guideposts to reform? Number one, this is always the most important thing. We want to enhance public safety. We want to keep communities safe. That's why we have a criminal justice system. That is the government's role and our community's role, to keep communities safe. We also want equal rights. We have to have a system that treats everybody the same, regardless of race, color, gender, socioeconomic status. That has to happen. We need equal rights. And lastly, we need a system that provides real second chances for those seeking redemption, for those who want a second chance, or a third chance if the case may call for it. And that's very important because for many years, our system has been very much focused more on punitive measures than rehabilitation and redemption. But that's been changing the last 10 years. We're going to talk about that. So these are really a rough cut of what we want to see in the system, from legislation to, about intent and accountability to the way that the grand jury system works and the way prosecutors do things. Sixth Amendment reforms, meaning that we actually follow the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. The Sixth Amendment requires that anyone who needs a lawyer is entitled to a lawyer, and if they can't afford it, it's supposed to be appointed to them. But 80% of the people in the system require a court-appointed lawyer, and that isn't happening. That's a problem. We also want to change sentencing rules in a safe manner and collateral consequences. We believe in restoration of rights, and yes, I mean all rights. There may be reasons not to have those rights, but it shouldn't be everybody gets nothing and you have to fight for something. It should be you start with everything and then we look at each person, and there may be reasons we don't want people doing different jobs, in certain occupations, but by and large, if we want to treat people like they're full citizens when they pay their debt to society, we need to treat them as full citizens, is my point of view. And so collateral consequences are a big deal. And if you all know what that is, that's really kind of the second prison sentence. It's what happens after you go to prison, you get out, you pay a debt to society. Society should forgive you then, right? You paid your debt, but it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because there are 52,000 different collateral consequences across the United States, local, federal, and state, that keep people from jobs, housing, loans, education, you name it. So it's pretty hard to get back on your feet when you don't have a place to live, you don't have any money, you can't get a loan, you can't get a job, you haven't been skilled anyway. So that's what I mean by collateral consequences, and it's a huge problem in this country, and it's a problem that's fundamentally at odds with the whole notion that man should never place a period where God has placed a comma. And that's what we do. We don't let people get up off the floor, and that needs to change. I want to give you some examples of how out of control in many ways our system is. It over-criminalizes, over-prosecutes, over-sentences, over-incarcerates, over-burdens. Look at that graph, okay? Back at the founding, there were 3 federal criminal laws: counterfeiting, piracy, and treason. By 1900, you see there's 36. Beginning of the war on drugs, we got 3,000. We have now 5,000 plus, but we don't know how many we have because no one's ever taken the time to count them, even though Congress has asked the Department of Justice to do it 2 times. And they've said both times, we can't do this, this is too hard. And only in Washington, D.C. would that be an acceptable answer. And then there are 300,000 plus criminal regulations. And I'm not even talking about the states yet. So that's part of the problem. What has that led to? 1 in 3, you heard Christian talk about the number of people with criminal records in this country. It's 1 in 3 adults in the United States have a criminal record. That's as many adults with a criminal record as a college degree. So that says something. We have 4% of the world's population, almost 25% of the world's prisoners. 2 million people in prison, that's number 1 overall in absolute numbers and rate of incarceration. We've got 6.6 million, 1 in 38 adults under some type of correctional control in this country. You'll see the graph, how the spending's gone up over the past, from the 1980s to today. 500,000 in prison up to 2 million. That's not the spending draft, I'm sorry. But that's how many more people we have in prison today. So it's gone from 500,000 to 2 million today. And from 1990 to 2005, we built, on average, a new federal or state prison or jail every 10 days in this country. That's where all the money went, people. Here's the spending. You see it there. We spend $250 billion a year or more from beginning to end in our criminal justice system. 80 billion plus on incarceration. That's 3 to 4 times more per capita than we spend on K through 12 education. And if you are what you eat, you definitely are what you spend. By that, we'd probably look like we care more about locking people up than we do educating them. I'm not saying we do, but the numbers aren't good. Kristen mentioned the problems this creates for families. It's a big deal. 2.7 million, that's 1 in 28 in this country, have a parent or parents in prison. And 2/3 of those individuals, those children, are going to grow up, and it's almost guaranteed they're going to have some type of issue in the system, whether it's juvenile or adult system. So 2/3 of them. What we've done in our whole war on drugs, which in my opinion has been a huge failure, drugs won, not a drug fan, but we're not fighting the right issues. What we've done, though, is created a generational poverty trap now we've seen since 1980 to the present. So how do we fix this? Well, first off, Villanova did a study a couple of years ago, and they said had mass incarceration not occurred, poverty would have decreased by more than 20%. And call it mass incarceration, call it over-incarceration. What we're talking about is the proliferation of these really long prison sentences, particularly mandatory minimums. And I think all of you, maybe you're not aware, mandatory minimums started in the 80s. They came into play when crime rates were already going down. Then they did another batch when crime was going up. And I lived in DC in the 80s and 90s. It was a pretty rough place. But they way overshot, and there's absolutely no evidence-based practices behind it. It was fear and emotion. And both sides did it, right? We had, H.W. Bush with the Willie Horton stuff, then you had the Clinton crime bill. So everybody did it. They thought it was probably the good thing to do, but it wasn't. And what we've learned is that when we've gone back to look at how much that may have reduced crime in that era, the best we can come up with was maybe 25% of the reduction in crime was due to mandatory minimums. And we don't even know if that's right. So we've really put a lot of people away for a long time and incarcerated a lot of people and broken up a lot of families and ruined a lot of communities. And some people needed to be away, but most of them didn't. But the good news is we're learning from this. So let's talk about the path forward. And you all live in Georgia, so you know it well. What we have here is, it's Texas. So Texas, back in 2007, Governor Rick Perry, they decided to start diverting people from prison when they were about to build a new prison, which would have cost over $2 billion. And so what they did was they kept certain people out of prison who, based on evidence-based research and data, were less likely to be violent, less likely to be a problem if they were released, if they got drug treatment, if they got an education, if they got a second chance. That's what Texas did. Then they added in programs in their prisons so people were educated, skilled, got drug treatment, got therapy, whatever it was. And so, since 2007, they've closed actually 8 prisons now. We shorted Texas, I'm sorry about that. They have the lowest crime rate since 1965, and it saved over $4 billion in taxpayer money. Georgia's had similar results, good results, smart on crime, soft on taxpayers. There's fewer people in prison than compared to the 2011 projections, when I think you had the highest incarceration rate in the country at that time. And you've got your lowest crime rate since 2008. And you've saved over $420 million in taxpayer money. So that's the way to go. That's what needs to happen. Now, the federal system is still kind of a mess. And it's kind of a mess because unlike governors, as we talked about, who when they get into office have to make their budgets, have to make sure everything adds up, and we're responsible for it, well, the feds get to print their own money. And the feds are also in a bubble. And the feds, the problem is, at least with criminal justice reform, with some of the people who are elected and still in office, these rules and laws came into place in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and those people that put the laws in place are still in office, and we're trying to get them to change their mind, and they're all like in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's tough to convince some people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s to change their mind, particularly on something like this, where we now know we really failed miserably, quite frankly, if we want to be honest, in how we handle the issues in the 80s and 90s. But things are changing. We worked with the Obama administration. They had a lot of success getting things through the Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary, couldn't get over the finish line. We think we have an opportunity today, hopefully before the midterms, to get something done under the Trump administration. And they've been working hard on a prison reform bill, which will do all the things I was talking about that have worked in the state, so people will go to, when they're in prison, will be rehabilitated, will be reformed, will get job skills, will be, get drug treatment, you name it. And the data shows that for every dollar spent on in-prison education programs, we defray up to $6 of future incarceration spending. And it reduces recidivism in the individuals who take those programs by 43%. Just makes sense. And so when those programs are in place, good things happen when people come out. Less recidivism. They're not returning back to prison. They're not getting worse over time. And better outcomes for law enforcement, for communities, for families, and it's good for employers and businesses too, because a lot of people are coming out now with skilled labor talent, and they can get these jobs that go wanting, the 6 million every year that aren't taken because people haven't been skilled in the skilled trades. We think there could be something on sentencing reform coming. There's a lot of back and forth right now. President Trump is actually in favor of sentencing reform. He's seen firsthand the criminal justice system right up straight because of the investigation that's going on. But more importantly, it's true. I mean, he's felt the power of prosecutors, and anyone who has knows what that's like. It's not comfortable. No, it's true. But he commuted Alice Johnston's life sentence. She was a first-time nonviolent offender, got life in prison. He commuted her sentence, and he started to understand what's wrong with these laws. Some of the laws, some people need long time in prison, but most don't. And so I think that's really changed his point of view. He seems on board with it. We'll see what happens. Hopefully it happens. If it doesn't, we're going to keep pushing, but we will push for the First Step Act to go into effect. Hopefully that'll get through the Senate, even if the sentencing reforms don't go forward. And that's really important for all the reasons I just mentioned. Plus, this means going forward in the federal prison system, pregnant women won't be shackled while they're giving birth to their children in prison, which is a good thing, but I didn't know we had to do it. As I was telling someone earlier, my wife and I have had 4 kids, and she wasn't going anywhere, man. I didn't have to shackle her. But in all seriousness, they still do that. So that's another reason this bill has to pass. So I want to talk about Safe Streets and Second Chances. This is our reentry program that we started this past year. It's a coalition of Koch Industries and Right on Crime and Florida State University and Charles Koch Institute. And so what we've done is we're in 4 different states right now. We're in Kentucky, Florida, Texas, and Pennsylvania. And the whole idea is, as you see on the screen, we have a program that it starts day 1 of incarceration. Reentry begins day 1 of incarceration. It doesn't begin 6 months before release, a year before release. That's good, but it's not good enough, particularly for people who have really never had a lot of training or any education or any skills. So we want to start at day 1 of incarceration. Our program right now, we're in the 4 states. We have 1,100 volunteers that are coming out of the 4 states, and they're coming out of prison. A first batch of people just came out. They volunteered for it. We have no say over who gets selected or what crimes they've committed. That's all up to the authorities. But our whole idea is that we're going to give one half of the group whatever the states give people coming out of prison in their jurisdictions, and the other half's going to get the program that we've put together with Carrie Pettis Davis, who's at Florida State University, has studied rehabilitation, incarceration, and criminal justice issues for over 10 years. Her and her team have looked at over 100,000 different models and different programs. They've put their program together. We're going to work with local nonprofits in the communities who deal with these issues and see who can do a better job at the one thing that matters, making people better so when they come out, they don't go back in, and they're a positive part of their community. We're very excited about it. We think that hopefully our program, we're not going to do the 21-year longitudinal studies like a lot of people do. That's way too long. We need to do something now. So we're probably going to fail fast and then hopefully succeed even faster when we start to get the data together, because the data is going to be key. The data is the key. That's what started the revolution in criminal justice reform in Texas, and that's what's gone to the other states. The evidence-based approach is what matters. And there's the data on this. We've already talked about the number of people in prison. You got 95% of the people in prison are coming out. That's 700,000 each year leaving prison. In the federal system, there's only about 45,000. The federal system is only 10% of the prison population. But there's all these people coming out. That's why it's so important to have rehabilitation programs, and education and other training programs in place. Now, our program is going to do that. We're very excited about the path forward. Want to go over some of the data we've already pulled together, which we think shows why this program is going to be so important. 4 times, incarcerated men, they want to work 4 times as much as they currently work while in prison. This is data we took just from the people who are now in the program. This gets back to something I saw when I worked in a plastics factory as a janitor. That was before I was a prison guard. But there were a bunch of guys who came in every day to work in a work crew on work release. And there were about 8 of them. And they were all really good guys that did really bad things, whose lives were over. But they so wanted to succeed, but they had no path forward. Now what we're seeing here is these are individuals coming out of prison and all different types of crimes and backgrounds and sentences, et cetera. We don't know all, we're still figuring all that out. But they want to succeed. And I think that's pretty amazing, right? And we talk a lot, when we hear more about self-actualization. What our program is trying to do is help these people who have been incarcerated have a say in their future. Because you talk about people who are in prison, by and large, they don't have much say in anything. And before they went to prison, it wasn't probably like their life was going so great either, a lot of times. So their whole life, they've been told what to do. They haven't gotten to choose. So when we talk to them, they want to do all the things everyone else wants to do. It's not a surprise. I mean, I knew that when I worked in the prison and worked with those guys who were coming in a work release. They wanted all these things, but there was no path. We're now giving them a path, and hopefully it's a brighter path. But incarcerated women want to work 3 times as much as they currently work. They want to have positive relationships. They want to go to church more. They want to have families. I mean, it's all this stuff. And we're hopeful that what we're doing can be part of the solution here. And so we're in those 4 states right now. We've also got John Kufos, who you're going to hear from shortly. John is with Right on Crime. He's also part of Safe Streets and Second Chances. His role is to work on advocacy. When we see an issue, a roadblock, occupational license, some rule that doesn't make sense, John and the team will go in the state and hopefully help get that knocked down so people can succeed when they're coming out of prison. So not all these collateral consequences everywhere. That's going to be a big part of it going forward. We're in the 4 states. We want to also be, next year, we're considering South Carolina, Nebraska, Arizona, Michigan, and Indiana. Georgia's also on our list, and we also have Louisiana, Minnesota, North Carolina, Iowa, and Colorado. So that's all very exciting, and we're hopeful that's going to be happening, as I said, in the next couple of years. But there's a lot all you can do as well. We'll talk about that later. But we do need these acts of Congress to get things passed. We need different rules in place. We need, prison rehabilitation programs. We need a bail system that makes sense, that people don't have to pay cash bail if they're not a threat to public safety and they're just poor and can't afford it. They shouldn't be in jail before their case is heard. We need to reform so many different things, and we're going to need legislators' help on that. But there's a lot of things that all of you can do here and all the people watching can do as well in their communities, and we'll talk about that later. And what we like to talk about, acts of Congress are very important, but the most important thing are acts of conscience, right? And that's what happens in our communities. That's what really will make the difference ultimately. Groups like ours, people like you, employers who hire people, take a chance on people, give them a second chance, because that's what this is all about, is really trying to untap all this energy, all this talent that's just been wasted, human misery and wasted talent for the last 30 or 40 years. That's our goal in this program. We're very excited about it. We're looking forward to next year going into those other states. And if you all want to be involved or engaged in any way, just let us know. I'm remiss not to tell you that the great team is here, Jenny Kim and Monica Roth and Jeff Holtzman today. And so glad to have them here. And that's all I have right now. I think we're going to go next to a Q&A, a moderated discussion. But thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me here today. All right. I think, John, you're sitting there.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, have a seat, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. So, let me do the intros here. We have, over a little bit, a little room. John Kufos, I've already talked about him. He's working with Right on Crime, the National Director of Reentry Initiatives at Right on Crime, and he's working with our Safe Streets and Second Chances project. John is widely recognized for his professional advocacy, was certified by the Supreme Court of New Jersey as a criminal trial attorney. He has tried complex jury trials to verdict and received numerous professional achievements, awards, and accolades. In 2014, John built the New Jersey Reentry Corporation to assist Governor Christie's nationally recognized leadership and innovation in the opioid crisis. His leadership in the business community was recognized in 2016 when NJBZ named him one of New Jersey's top 40 under 40. He is a regular speaker on criminal justice, healthcare, and reentry issues to local, state, and federal governments. John holds a bachelor's degree and master's degrees from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, as well as a law degree from Fordham University. Cynthia Roseberry is Vice President for Institutional Advancement and Executive Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Wilberforce University. During the Obama administration, Cynthia served as project manager of the Historic Clemency Project 2014. Ms. Roseberry also served on the Charles Tolson Task Force on Federal Corrections, a panel charged with examining the federal corrections system. Previously, she was the executive director for the Federal Defenders of the Middle District of Georgia. Ms. Roseberry is a distinguished speaker and has taught criminal justice classes at DePaul University College of Law in Chicago. A founding board member of the Georgia Innocence Project, she was the first African-American female president of the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. She has received many awards, such as the 2016 COS Humanitarian Award. She holds a Bachelor's of Science from Wilberforce University and a law degree from Georgia State University College of Law. Lastly, David Windetcher.
Yep.
Got it. Woo. He was admitted to the Georgia Bar in 2012 and the Florida Bar in 2014. David is a member of the Florida and Georgia Court of Appeals and the Georgia and Florida Supreme Court, among others. Prior to establishing the Windetcher firm, David was an associate attorney at the criminal defense firm Aurora and La Scala. David is the author of The American Dream, His Story in the Making, which portrays the difficulty of obtaining the American dream as an impoverished minority. David is also the founder of Red Inc. Red. It's a nonprofit organization which sponsors education programs for impoverished individuals and juveniles facing nonviolent criminal charges. David is a recipient of Martindale Hubbell's Client's Distinction Award in 2013 and 2014. He is a frequent guest on HLN's Nancy Grace and NPR Radio as a legal expert. Nancy Grace, wow, that's pretty cool. And David holds a bachelor's degree from American Intercontinental University and a law degree from John Marshall Law School. All right, well, give them a round of applause and we'll get started. We'll start with John. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and you've had quite an experience in the criminal justice system.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for being here. Some of the things that were said in the beginning about issues that Koch are looking at when you talk about children of incarcerated parents, and I'll start there. My father was a federal fugitive who escaped from prison, actually, when I was young. I was taken around the country, saw about 39 states, and I remember when I applied for my bar license, I had 14 addresses that were legal addresses, let alone the other 40 that I had. Mom was a teenage mom and had issues that go with that. And we grew up in poverty. Eventually, my father would be captured. I would move to the Jersey Shore, which I promise you is much nicer than the TV show. I was there when there were no people down there, and I ended up becoming a janitor and working my way through college and law school. But along the way, I picked up an alcohol problem. And that alcohol problem would have disastrous consequences for somebody else. In 2011, I was driving drunk, and as I did so often. But this time, I hit somebody and tried to lie my way out of it. And this was, let me stop for a second. Thankfully, by the grace of God, that person recovered and didn't die. Nothing I did helped that. I would be sentenced to prison, to 6 years in prison in New Jersey. Interestingly enough, while I was out on bail, I would be I would argue my last case, which was before the New Jersey Supreme Court. It was a big search and seizure case, and you would think that, from a guy from my background arguing at the time the largest search and seizure case in the state would have been the pinnacle of my career. But I was just finishing up a career to get ready to go to prison. While in prison, I would see the things that shaped why I do this work. First of all, when we looked at some of those statistics that are still up there, I lived that. When I was in prison, nobody asked me for money, which was good because I was going bankrupt, but nobody asked me for money anyway. But everybody asked me for a job, right? These people wanted the dignity of work. They wanted to be able to take care of their families. And that is such an important lesson, but they couldn't because of a series of entanglements. I get out, I know I'm going on a little long, but I get out, I asked to volunteer at a reentry program run by former Governor Jim McGreevey, and all I wanted to do was help restore driver's licenses with my old drinking buddies actually, but I was sober at this point, my old friends. I called in a series of favors, and we cleared up licenses to get people to work. And from there, I had the blessing of being a part of this work we're doing today.
Thank you. Cynthia, thank you. Went over your bio. You've done pretty much everything, it seems, in the criminal justice field. So just from your experience, what do you think we're failing to address? What's the number one thing in our criminal justice system that might mitigate all the people that we have in prison and help them come out better and then keep people from going in again?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for having this forum. It's very important. Thank you for being here today to hear what folks who generally don't have a voice need. I think one of the things that we're afraid to address is the mental health issues associated with those who are in prison and who are coming out. When I was on the Colson Task Force, I recall asking the head of psychiatry at the prisons, are you doing anything to measure the effect of imprisonment on folks in prison? And the answer was no. And we know that in war, we torture people by placing them in cages. Many of the folks who are in prison come from communities that have a lot of trauma, that's not treated. Part of that is the reason that they resort to criminality as a livelihood. And then we place them in this artificially traumatized environment, and we say, you need to heal yourself. And once you leave, you need to be well enough to get a job. You need to be well enough to interact with your family again. You need to be well enough to function in society. And I think we're afraid to talk about that because then Willie Horton does come up, right? But these are folks who are suffering from PTSD. They're not unlike veterans coming home from war. And unless we address that mental health piece, as one a person who returned said to me, we have to meet them where they are. Unless we meet them where they are and address that piece, they won't be able to fit in no matter how many jobs they know how to do.
Well, there's 10 times the number of people in prison with mental health issues than there are people in mental institutions. Is that correct?
That's right.
So how do we fix that? What do we need to do?
Well, rehabilitation, as you've embraced, needs to include having an assessment, a legitimate assessment when they come to prison. First, there needs to be an assessment prior to prosecution and incarceration so that those folks who are criminal because of their mental health issues can be diverted. But if they land in the criminal justice system, we need a robust mental health component of rehabilitation for them while they're there. We at least need not to return them worse than they were when they went into prison, right? And we, at optimal, need to return them better.
Thank you. Thank you. David, you also have a very interesting story as well. If you want to talk about that, that's fine. Or we can also talk about your experience in between probation supervision services and restorative justice programs, and how both affect a community as a whole.
Well, thanks for asking about the pronunciation of my name, Mark. I guess the witty response would have been just like it's spelled, but I wasn't fast enough. Yeah. So after hearing this, I probably may be the least qualified to be up here, but I always like rooting for the underdog. And so let me say this. I'm not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become. And poverty led to my first arrest at 11. And at 13, I witnessed my first murder in a neighborhood I grew up in, Carroll City, Dade County. And at 14, I got jumped into a gang because I wanted to survive the neighborhood. The theory is you can't be this white walking around the hood because it's just not going to bode well. So I needed some protection. I became a Latin king. At the age of 14, I started gang banging. And by 16, I dropped out of school, not because I wasn't interested in education, but simply because I grew up in Argentina, and the math that they were teaching me in 5th grade in Argentina, they were trying to teach me again in 9th grade here, so they couldn't stimulate me in any way possible. So I dropped out. By the time I was 19, gang banging and being out of school caused me to have 13 arrests, 8 months behind bars. My body's riddled with bullet holes and tattoos and stab wounds. I survived all of that. By the age of 19, I got out. And I wanted to become an attorney because I saw, as Mark alluded to, Brian Stevenson, that resource, not culpability, shapes outcomes in the criminal justice system, which is really true. I can tell you this much. I don't know a single African American or Hispanic person with 13 arrests that has a license to practice law, and I can tell you that my skin color played a role in me getting here. So it took 15 years, though, to make good on my wrongdoings. And what I ended up doing once I got out and became an attorney, I published an autobiography, and things started going really well. I always wanted to give back. My nickname as a gangster was Red, for obvious reasons. I don't think I had a choice, right? So the acronym in RED stands for Rehabilitation Enables Dreams. I was saved October 16, 2001, so if you read the Bible, when Jesus speaks, it's in red writing. I don't want to make this religious or theological in any sense, but that's just me personally. So the name of the program applies for me perfectly. And to answer your question, Mark, the difference between probation services and restorative justice and how that affects our community. Well, probation is punitive. I know this from personal experience, and I know this just because it's a racket. It's about money. It's not about community control or safety or any of that stuff. It's about turning a profit, plain and simple. Privatized probation is the biggest racket that our country is facing right now, and it's legalized. With regards to restorative justice is rehabilitative in nature. It's an evidence-based approach at trying to provide treatment and services to those going through the criminal justice system so that way they remain out of the criminal justice system. It's not a one-fix-all universal support system. It's a let's assess this individual, find out what they're struggling with and how we can assist them. And probation officers are not the kind of people that probationers want to hang out with, but in restorative justice programs, you assign mentors to these kids who are relatable to them, who they want to hang out with. And the way that affects the community would be the third prong on there, where it causes us to be fiscally irresponsible simply because we are just misusing our general tax fund.
Thank you. John, I want to talk to you about Safe Streets, Second Chances. Yeah. And you've already done some great work in Mississippi and other places with Safe Streets. But could you talk about what are the barriers that people with criminal records have, what they face, and which ones can be immediately removed? And then how are we going to help them do that overall in our initiative at Safe Streets, Second Chances? What's our goal?
Sure. So the barriers are vast. And I'll start with the easiest one, which is identification. So that sounds like really low-hanging fruit, right? When I was released, and this is pretty much par for the course in most of the country, I had a prison ID. And the prison ID doesn't comply with the Real ID Act, so it can't be used for anything, well, for anything at all, actually. Come to think of it.
It's great.
I was trying. I have it. It's good if you ever lock yourself out of a room in your house, you can hit the lock with it. So I've done that a few times. Beyond that, I call it the I-9 issue. And for any of our, especially for our human resources folks in the room, if anyone came to Georgia Pacific and wanted to work for you, regardless of their background, they can't fill out an I-9, they don't work here, right? Or anywhere else on earth, or in America, pardon me. So You would think that the prison would do that, Mark. They don't. So one of the most basic things, we've been told in Safe Streets and Second Chances, thanks to our research-informed policy ideas, ID and transportation, getting from point A to point B, but even having identification becomes the primary issue. So having ID, now think of everything you need ID for, right? When you want to go to the doctor, if you had no skills and you wanted to go to your one-stop career center, your American Job Center, to get skills, if you wanted an apartment, if you wanted to walk down the street and the police officer says, "Who are you?" Right? All of these things. And I'll give you a real-time example of where we're looking to go. So for us, the I-9 issue is just the beginning. What we want to do is get people to driver's licenses, because an I-9 issue will solve a non-driver ID, and then maybe beyond. And the way we do that is by first working with the prison system and outside providers about making sure Social Security cards and birth certificates and non-driver IDs are secured for every inmate. And then from there, partnering with the motor vehicle offices and outside legal providers to clear up driver's licenses. This is something that we did in New Jersey, and we cleared up over 400 driver's licenses in my 3 years with the New Jersey Reentry Program, Reentry Corporation. That's number one. And the idea is, it sounds foolish that everyone in here would probably say, well, that's probably being done, right? Absolutely not. It's the ticket to the dance, so to speak, right? Think of what you would do without ID and then go forward.
So that's number one. Anything else? That it?
I think our goal overall is to get people job ready, right? The dignity of work cannot be overstated here. And to do this, we have to connect services. In New Jersey, one of the things that I would say is that if you have an alcohol problem, if you have an addiction problem, if you have housing issues, we must solve those, but they serve as a barrier to work and then hopefully family reunification. So along the way, that's what we hope to do, is to get people ready to leave, and then ready to participate in training. And of course, collaterally, we'd like to see the training programs be better inside the walls.
Thank you. Okay, Cynthia, I want to ask you about education and its role in people ending up in prison to begin with, and then what happens when they get educated while in prison. So a little bit about who ends up in prison to begin with a lot of times, and then can that be changed once they're in prison? And how do we do a better job of getting it done before people go to prison?
Sure, thank you for that. So as a federal defender, I came to understand that there was a particular formula for the client I would have. That client was a young African-American man who didn't have a father in the home, who dropped out of high school by the 9th grade. That person is surely going to be the federal defendant's client, or the Gideon's Promises folks' client. So, Ben Franklin told us that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the savings, like Georgia is doing, the savings that we get on the back end of bringing people out should definitely go to education on the front end. I was reared down the street from here, right, by Morehouse. I went to Washington High School. I can tell you that in my community, I saw firsthand how the lack of education affects how people move and think of themselves in the world. We don't often think of it, but poor people in our country who are citizens can go to school for the first time speaking English as a second language, speaking standard English as a second language. And I saw that firsthand. So when you start off, not even having a command of the language, you can't learn, you can't move forward, and you don't think of that for yourself. So moving education to the front end is important. My experience with the federal system is that, sure, there's a GED program and judges order that folks should get a GED. There's a waiting list, the waiting list is years long to get a GED in federal prison. So we need more, it's all about resources. We need resources there. But I would also offer that I recently did a ride along with the DC police officers at 3 in the morning. I don't know why I chose that time, but it was the best time to go. We need judges to understand what communities look like, so that when a judge says, go get a job, why don't you have a job? If you know that that community looks like a poor school and lack of extracurricular activities for someone to develop and lack of mentorship and all of those things, understanding how gangs flourish in communities, then judges will understand that the education that that person before them got was a different kind of education, and we need to reframe that for folks.
Thank you. So David, tell us about the work you're doing with offenders, nonviolent offenders, what that's like, and what do you think is most important when you're dealing with first-time offenders to get them back on the right path?
Sure, Mark. Quickly, I want to touch on what Cynthia was saying, and I want to address it to Keith. I think that sometimes I think that a prerequisite to giving the discretion to individuals who are entrusted with making an imprisonment sentence recommendation, judges, probation officers, or prosecutors, they should sit in jail for a little while and learn what it feels like. It's not a cupcake.
Well,
Gonna lock them up, Keith?
But one thing I think, I agree with you on that, is before someone passes some legislation about putting people in prison or how to be treated in prison, they should actually go visit a prison and meet people and talk to them who are in prison and meet their families as well. So anyway, but
I think it's the most prudent thing for us to do. That way everybody's aware and informed of how difficult. The meals are terrible. The time is not spent well. No matter what you wear, it's going to stink and make you feel uncomfortable. And when you come out, there's going to be issues you're going to be suffering from. So it's important. But to answer the question, Mark, so I can only answer based on the experience through our program. Our program, RED, is in the beta phase in the DeKalb County Superior Court right now. And we're in year 3. We're about 9 months into year 3. And the reason I'm proud of it is we take 25 participants per year because we're just in the trial and error phase right now. But for the last 2 years, we have graduated 87% of our participants, and 100% of them have not reoffended, which is a big deal. So, thank you. It's a 12-month curriculum, and we start by looking at the docket, seeing who is a nonviolent offender, and can we rehabilitate them. Then in the first month, we do an orientation. In that orientation, we explain the difference between prosecution and diversion, accountability core, and we incentivize them. We tell them, look, you're going to have to jump through these hoops here. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be rigorous. But if you do this, we restrict your record, we expunge it and seal it. That way you get your life back. So they're already now thinking, okay, so if I sit here for 12 months minimum, I'm going to get my credit, my case dismissed. In the second month, we do what's called an LSI, the level of service intake. We do an assessment that helps us understand where these individuals are personally, emotionally, intellectually, academically, financially, home cases, and that allows us to, in our third month, assign a mentor to them that will walk alongside of them for the balance of the 9 months of the program. In the fourth month, we do emotional intelligence. We all know you can't increase someone's intelligence quotient, but you can increase their emotional intelligence. So if you teach them to be socially aware, if you teach them to develop interpersonal relationships through anger management, and the reason anger management is so important, growing up in the hood, you get angry when you're hungry. And so you don't know what to do except take food somehow. So anger management is important, self-control. And then once we have these soft skills in place, we go into the next level, which is our civil rights assertion. We created, everything we do is software-based. And we created a simulation of police-citizen encounters that teaches individuals the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendment in layman terms. And so these individuals now start developing confidence that they can have a conversation with a police officer, even if you have a rogue one. We know that there's plenty of rogue officers out there. So they try to de-escalate by asserting their rights in a professional, calm manner. Then we do social stuff. We take them out, we do a ride along so they can see the police officer needs to go home to his kids and his wife, and the police officers can see that every kid is not a hoodlum. Then we do voting rights. We teach them these videos. By the time they're done with their program, halfway through, they'll have a GED, a voter's registration card, a state-issued ID. We know the importance of that. And then we start transitioning into the financial literacies, LinkedIn accounts, resumes, because the compulsory education system is failing these kids simply because they're teaching them how to bake a cookie, but they won't teach them how to draft a resume. So who cares about baking a cookie if you don't know how to buy the ingredients, right? So we're teaching them all of these things that are going to keep them out of the criminal justice system. And then at the end of it, we do a record restriction process where we show them what their record looks like, what these things mean, and we restrict everything. So they come in with absolutely nothing to lose, and we equip them with things they want to protect because now they have things to lose. Their voice matters, they have a voter's registration card, they got a GED, and they're capable of transitioning into college through our program to either KSU or Georgia State University.
Or Wilberforce University.
Or, yeah, we got, can you make the connection?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll need to do that. So our program has been successful because we focus on social, financial, and civic literacies, the things that they don't teach at the high school levels. If we were teaching these things at the high school levels, we probably wouldn't have first-time nonviolent offenders in the first place.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're right about out of time here, so I want to thank you all again for being here and all you watching. So just want to kind of go through what you can do if you're interested, the call to action, so to speak. It's all about your time, talent, and treasure. First, if you're interested in learning more about any of the legislation I talked about at the federal level, let me know. But you should call your elected officials and ask them about the First Step Act, where they are on it. That's the prison reform bill that's in the Senate right now. You should also engage with your local authorities and your state authorities, find out what they're doing on criminal justice reform and procedures. Again, Georgia's done a good job, but be informed and be involved. That's very important. I think one of the biggest issues, and we've talked about it a fair amount here already, is getting involved in communities. And what that looks like is anything under the sun, quite frankly. There's a lot of different opportunities. That could be helping people returning from prison. You can visit people who are in prison. You can tutor people in prison. You can do work with youth in your communities. I know a lot of people here do that. Youth Entrepreneurs is a great program. There's a lot of great programs, but trying to break that whole school to prison pipeline issue for people who need more attention, more focus, more mentoring. And basically, if you're an employer like at Coke and GP, hire people with criminal records. Do the work behind it, do a background check and all, but take a chance on someone. With 1 in 3 people in this country having a criminal record, if you're not going to take a chance on 1/3 of the potential applicant pool, that's very short-sighted as a business owner. That's why we at Coke have banned the box for several years, and since I've been with Coke 24 years now, and from the time I started, we hired people with criminal records based on the situation. But those are all things we can do, and at the end of the day, it's really trying to support each other and help your communities get better. And I think that to the extent, again, acts of Congress are really important, having the right people in office to do the right thing. But it's really all about the communities, because we know that politicians, when they feel the heat, they're going to see the light. And we know that politics is really, it's all downstream from culture. So we drive this, and we should drive these initiatives and make sure that our communities represent how we feel about our criminal justice system and how we treat each other. So thank you very much for being here today.